So hi everyone. We've visited some folks in Fort St. John, just outside of Fort St. John. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
We're Paul and Esther Peterson, and we have land along the banks that will be impacted by Site C should it be built. The reservoir water level will come up 50 meters from the present level, and the sloughing that's going to be caused from the wave action and from the water puts our property in jeopardy.
Our house and our hay shed and our riding arena.
And could you explain what sloughing is to folks? We're city folks, we don't know anything.
The erosion caused by the wave action on the reservoir is going to undercut the banks, and the banks aren't stable, they're just shale, and eventually they just keep falling away until you get a new level for where the sloughing stops, because of the fill has stopped. The fill from the sloughing stops the wave action from impacting any more on the banks.
One of the things that we're hearing is that there's quite a bit of local opposition to the dam. What are some of the other effects of the dam on the community here?
Well, it'll be the loss of the sport, the river boating sport. BC Hydro is claiming that there'll be a nice reservoir for people to boat on. However, then at another meeting we had on environmental impact statement, they said that the reservoir wouldn't be available for, first of all, 2 years, and then somebody questioned that and they said, well, 5 years, and then somebody questioned that, and they actually don't know. And the fact is that these banks will not be stable. Huge tracts and chunks of land could fall in at any time once the reservoir is built, because as you can see, it's just silt and sand and clay. And so then if you're on a boat, it's going to be a hazard that from wave or from bank pieces falling in, deadfall.
So some of the other significant impacts are the river will be widened by up to 3 times, which is going to flood about 16,000 acres of agricultural land. And some of that land is prime agricultural land, class 1 and 2, which is pretty rare within the province of British Columbia. And there's a unique microclimate that exists within this valley that keeps it quite a few degrees warmer, which extends the growing season. That, combined with the longer days that we have up here during the summer months, really extends the growing season and allows for a really broad range of crops to be produced in there. And it would allow us to provide the 100-mile diet for local people in this area, instead of having the bulk of our produce shipped up from the Lower Mainland and from California. And additionally, we're going to lose about 15,000 acres of forested land. The bulk of the south bank of the river is a wildlife preserve at present, and there's a lot of critical winter habitat, the south-facing slopes, that would be logged and destabilized and rendered much less useful for overwintering for many mammals. Additionally, there are several islands all along the 83-kilometer stretch of river. They contain eagles' nests, and they also provide very protective birthing habitat for large mammals. So those will be logged and eliminated as well.
And would you? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
This is also the narrowest corridor on the Y-to-Y for migrating for the caribou, right? Isn't this important for that?
It is. It's important for large mammals and for bears, and yes, it's the narrowest point in the Yellowstone to Yukon Wildlife Corridor.
And would you folks be able to explain to us a little bit more about your interactions with BC Hydro, with industry, with proponents? How has that been? How's your experience been?
Well, they've come out to visit and have taken a look at the banks here and where the house sits, and then talked, just presented where they proposed this safe line to be. But it had, other than that, it's just been town council or town open house meetings that we had no real true discussion on price to buy us out or anything like that. But that's because it hasn't been approved yet.
You also mentioned they got rid of the BC environmental.
Oh, the BCUC.
Yes.
Right.
So could you explain that?
So in 2010, former Premier Campbell specifically removed the oversight of the British Columbia Utilities Commission of this project, the Site C Dam, and that was presumably to eliminate an impediment to proceeding with the dam. Normally, the BCUC is charged with ensuring that projects of this nature are within the best interests of British Columbians, and they do a really comprehensive assessment as compared to the environmental assessment process, which is currently underway. That's much more narrow in scope. For example, the purpose of the project, one of the purposes is to maximize the hydroelectric potential of the Peace River from the existing Peace Canyon Dam, 83 kilometers downstream, to this proposed Site C Dam location. So that's a sort of an example of how the present environmental assessment really won't even include a comparison to other sources of energy such as solar or wind or geothermal, because the purpose is so narrow and they're conducting the EA on this particular project. So we're hoping that the British Columbia Utilities Commission oversight will be reinstated, and they will do a more thorough examination of the need for the project. They'll need justification that this energy is in fact needed and is in the best interests of British Columbians, and they'll also examine much more closely alternatives to the project. In the 1980s, this project was assessed by the British Columbia Utilities Commission, and the Commission determined that the project should not proceed because the demand for the energy could not be justified. And given that Premier Clark has repeatedly stated in the past year that the power from Site C is going to be needed exclusively for the proposed liquid natural gas projects, it would seem to me that once again it would be clear through the BCUC assessment that the need for this power can't be justified. It's not in the interest of all British Columbians to be paying for an infrastructure project that's $8 billion, and it will definitely go into cost overruns because the industry isn't paying for this, you and I are. And interestingly, talking about going into cost overruns, BC Hydro was building a boat ramp just about 1 mile downstream from where Site C is proposed to be built. And they got into cost overruns of 35% on building just a simple boat ramp. And the media quoted that the reasons for it were there were challenging environmental conditions and challenging weather conditions. So you can imagine the challenges that they're going to run into building a 60-meter high dam across this river.
Andrea explained about the delta as well. How this? Do you know much information about the delta?
Downstream.
It's
So
very critical. That's a very critical thing. Delta.
yeah, basically downstream, the Peace River, of course, flows right down into northern Alberta, and there are significant concerns by environmental groups and First Nations down there because traditionally the Peace River would freeze, and there would be ice and buildup, and then eventually that would release and it would flood the delta, and there's a lot of marshes and wetland areas in there that are critical for bird and other animal habitat. And with the control of the river now and the control of the flow thanks to the existing 2 upstream dams, the river, it doesn't freeze as it used to, and it doesn't allow for this release of water and the replenishing of those wetland areas. So if Site C is implemented, again, the water levels are going to be affected that much more, and it will affect the delta replenishment that much further as well.
And just so you know that the Mackenzie Delta is the size of Mississippi Delta. It's a huge delta, and it's a really critical water habitat, and the First Nation people depend on the wildlife and the fish within that. So there has been a lot of opposition from Alberta's side as well.
What do you think y'all will do if this goes through?
Well, we'll have to sell. We'll move because, our house is impacted. Now, I can show you a picture. You can take a picture on the map of what is exactly impacted. But, we'll lose our hayland and the house and everything. Now, the other thing is that we had spoken with former Premier Ed Smith and MLA, right, Ed Smith, and he was the energy minister here, right? And so Paul's father had known Ed for a long time, so of course he knew Ed, and we met him uptown at a pool actually, and so he said we were building this house, and when he talked to him where we were building the house, Ed said, well, that's just about where we were going to build that dam back in the 80s, right? So then Paul asked him why they ended up shelving this project, and some of the reasons was that, firstly, he said, from Hudson's Hope out to the Mackenzie Delta, the Peace River is a Canadian federal heritage river, and these are rivers that are set aside for Canadians to enjoy by boat, so they can see where travelers, and like the first white man came through here, and the first fort by white men were right down there on that bank, right across, practically right across from us is the old fort, right? So this is a heritage trading river. The second reason was, as Andrea mentioned, that they couldn't recapture. It wasn't worth the energy that we were going to get for the money that they were going to spend then, back in the 1980s. He talked about opposition from Alberta. He talked about, importantly, was that the silting in was a huge issue because further down it's different than the bedrock that the first two dams were put in. But he said the final nail in the coffin for this project was that they couldn't guarantee that this dam would be 100% stable. They couldn't find anything stable to anchor the previous dam to. And he said, so in the end, we just shelved it under the BCUC's recommendation. It was a ridiculous project, and as far as I'm concerned, nothing has really changed, so it still is.
Thank you.
Thanks.